The pneumatic system controls are installed on the air conditioning. The pneumatic system controls are installed on the air conditioning panel. There is a bleed switch for each engine and the APU, and there is a rotary switch for control of the cross-bleed valve. The pneumatic system indications consist of lights on the air conditioning panel and of the displays on the ECAM bleed page. The pneumatic valve and flow indications are displayed on the ECAM bleed page. In general, valves that are operating normally are displayed in green, whether they are open or closed, and valves display in amber when they're not in the commanded position or are in transit. The APU bleed valve displays green under all conditions. The pre-cooler outlet temperature is normally displayed in green, but is displayed in amber for overheat conditions or low temperature conditions below 150 degrees Celsius. Notice the over temperature values and times that will cause an amber display. You should know that on the ground with engines at idle, the pre-cooler outlet temperature may be below 150 degrees Celsius. The pre-cooler pressure is normally displayed in green, but it is displayed in amber if under 4 psi, or overpressure is detected by the BMC at between 57 and 60 psi. With the engine 1 and 2 bleed switches off, the associated bleed valve is closed and the off light in the switch is illuminated. With the engine 1 and 2 bleed switches on, the associated bleed valve will open as long as there is adequate pressure. The APU bleed valve is closed. The engine fire push button is not selected out, and there are no detected leaks, overpressure, or over temperature conditions. The amber fault light in the engine bleed switches will come on for the conditions shown here. The ECAM will also display the reason and action for the fault. With the APU bleed switch off, the APU bleed valve is closed. With the APU bleed switch on, the blue on light illuminates and the APU bleed valve will open as long as the APU N is greater than 95% and there is no detected leak in the APU or the left side bleed. If a leak is detected in the right side, the APU bleed valve will still open, but the cross bleed valve will automatically close. The amber fault light in the APU bleed switch and the ECAM caution will come on if the system detects an APU leak. The cross bleed selector is a 3-position rotary switch. The shut and open positions will electrically close or open the cross bleed valve. The auto position will cause the cross bleed valve to open if the APU bleed valve is open, while also causing the engine bleed valves to close. On the other hand, if the APU bleed valve is closed, the cross bleed valve will close and the engine bleeds will be allowed to open if the respective engine is running. With auto selected, the cross bleed valve will also close if a leak is detected. We'll now go through the normal operation of the pneumatic system from the beginning of a flight to when the aircraft is parked. When external air is used, the cross-bleed selector should be in the open position to open the cross-bleed valve. This allows external air to flow to both packs and to both engine starters. However, when external air is used for starting, only number 2 engine is started with the external air, and number 1 engine is started with bleed from the number 2 engine. When the APU is started, the APU bleed will be switched on. The cross-bleed selector is normally in auto. The APU bleed is delivered, the cross-bleed valve opens, and the engine bleed valves are signaled to close. In auto, after the engines are started and the APU air is shut down, either because of turning off the APU bleed or shutting down the APU, the cross-bleed valve will close. At this time, the engine bleeds are normally selected on. The engine bleed valves will open and supply engine bleed air to the system. This is the configuration of the pneumatic system throughout a normal flight. When the APU is started upon arrival at the gate, the APU bleed will be switched on. This action will close the engine bleed valves, open the cross-bleed valve, the cross-bleed selector is normally in auto, and the APU will supply bleed air to both sides of the pneumatic system. If external air is to be used after parking, The crossbleed selector must be positioned to open, and the APU bleed must be switched off. Now, let's answer some questions.